They say the dead don't return, but what happens when someone you've mourned for half a decade suddenly shows up smiling at a school pickup line? That's what happened to 8-year-old Emma Brooks on what should have been a normal spring day at Ridgefield Elementary. The skies were bright, the air crisp with the excitement of the annual field day, and Emma was just another quiet kid standing in the lunch line with a tray of mac and cheese and grapes. She wasn't the loudest in class. Emma had her mom's soft laugh and her dad's thoughtful eyes, or at least that's what everyone said. The truth was, she barely remembered her father. Adam Brooks had died in a car crash when she was just 3. The few hazy memories she had were sealed like sacred gems inside her. His voice, his laugh, a game they used to play. That was it. But that afternoon, something odd caught her eye. Across the playground, near the chain-link fence, a man stood waving at a girl in another class. Emma blinked, and her grip on the lunch tray wobbled. The man had sandy brown hair, stood the same way her dad used to in old photos, and when he laughed, it hit Emma in the gut. She knew that laugh. She narrowed her eyes against the sun. The girl he waved at, Sophie, a quiet student who'd transferred earlier that semester, ran into his arms. And just as he bent down to greet her, Emma saw it. A scar above his right eyebrow. The same one that appeared in the only framed photo of her father on her nightstand. "Emma, are you okay?" Her teacher, Mrs. Carson, asked, approaching with concern. But Emma couldn't speak. The man, he looked right at her. For a moment, their eyes locked. His face registered something, shock, recognition, before he looked away and hurried Sophie toward the parking lot. That night, Emma barely touched her dinner. Her mom, Julia, a school administrator in the district, noticed immediately. At 36, she'd spent the last 5 years building a life from what was left after Adam's crash. Their cozy home outside Cleveland was full of books, photos, and routines that helped them feel whole again. "You feeling all right, honey?" Julia asked, clearing the table. Emma hesitated. Then, suddenly, the words tumbled out. "I saw Daddy at school today." Julia froze. She was used to these moments. Emma sometimes said she dreamed of her dad or felt him close. A therapist had reassured Julia this was normal for grieving children. "Did you have a dream at school, maybe?" Julia asked gently. "No, I saw him. For real. He was picking up Sophie, the girl in Ms. Moreno's class. And he had the scar, Mom, just like in the picture." The dish Julia held slipped, clattering into the sink. She turned, trying to stay calm. "Sweetheart, I know you miss him. We both do. But Daddy's gone. Remember, he died in that accident when you were little." Emma's eyes filled with frustration. "You don't believe me." Juliet knelt beside her daughter, wrapping her arms around her. "It's not that I don't believe you. It's just sometimes when we miss people, our minds try to bring them back. It's how we cope." "I know what I saw," Emma said quietly. That night, the bedtime routine went on like always. Pajamas, story, a kiss on the forehead, and their daddy talks, a nightly ritual where Emma could ask questions about her father. Julia offered to bring out the family album. Emma shook her head. "I don't need pictures. I saw him." Later, Julia sat in the living room, a glass of wine untouched. She couldn't stop thinking about Emma's words. The certainty in her voice. The scar. It was such a specific detail, one that wasn't obvious in most pictures. She pulled out the wedding album. There he was, Adam, young and smiling. The scar was faint, only visible in a close-up from their honeymoon. May 14th, the day Emma claimed to see her father, was the exact date of the accident 5 years ago. The official report had said Adam's car crashed during a storm and was swept off a bridge. The vehicle was found, his wallet, phone, all there, but no body. After weeks of searching, they declared him dead. The closed casket funeral was brutal. Hundreds came. Adam had been a trusted financial advisor, a respected member of their community. Julia traced his face in the photo. If it wasn't you, who did she see? The next day, Julia urged Emma to stay home from school, but the child was insistent. He might come again. During lunch at her office, Julia pulled out a dusty file folder. Adam's death certificate, police reports, sympathy cards. She kept everything. It was part grief, part legal necessity. The certificate clearly stated, Adam Ray Brooks, deceased. April 10th. That evening, Emma came home disappointed. He wasn't there today. Emma, Julia said gently, leading her to the table. She laid out the documents. Sweetheart, I want to show you something. These are real. They're why no daddy isn't out there. Emma studied the papers. Her eyes, so much like Adam's, flicked up. But what if they're wrong? That night, Julia found a drawing on Emma's desk. It was of a man and a girl beside a car. The man had the scar, drawn clearly. The man was labeled Sophie's dad. By the third day, Julia could no longer brush it off. Emma's insistence, the scar, the drawing. It wasn't just imagination. She called her friend Margot, who worked in the front office at Ridgefield. There's a new girl. Sophie, last name Harrison? Yep, Sophie Harrison. Moved from Michigan. Lives with her dad. Her mom passed away from cancer. What's the dad like? Richard Harrison. Volunteers here on Thursdays. Quiet. Kind. The kids love him. Julia's heart thudded. He kind of reminds me of... Margot trailed off. Never mind. Say it. He looks a little like Adam. I almost said it the first time I met him, but I figure it would upset you. Do you have his photo on file? Driver's license from his background check. Give me a sec. Julia held her breath. He's here now, actually, at the volunteer orientation. Want me to introduce you? It might put the whole thing to rest. He's there, right now, in the library, but they'll be done in 15 minutes. I'm coming. Julia drove like she was in a dream. All she wanted was closure, proof that this man was not Adam. She parked, walked toward the entrance, heels tapping fast. As the volunteers filed out, one man caught her eye. Sandy brown hair, blue shirt, athletic build. His profile, dear God, was him. He turned. Their eyes locked. He froze. She froze. And then he turned and walked away. Before we continue the story, if you're new here, please consider subscribing to our channel. It really helps us keep making stories like this. Julia couldn't move. She stood there, staring after the man who had just vanished down the sidewalk like a ghost slipping between worlds. Her heart was pounding so loud she was sure the entire school could hear it. Everything in her body told her to run after him, to grab him by the arm and scream, "Adam!" But her feet wouldn't obey. Her world, once shattered by grief, was now spinning in another kind of chaos. Was it hope? Horror? Disbelief? She finally turned and walked to her car, hands trembling so badly she fumbled the keys twice before unlocking the door. She sat behind the wheel, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was it him? Did her eyes deceive her? Could grief do this after 5 years? At home that evening, she said nothing to Emma. How could she? She wasn't even sure what she believed. She made pasta, helped Emma with homework, and smiled when her daughter chatted about art class like it was any other Thursday. But inside, Julia was in turmoil. After putting Emma to bed, Julia went up to the attic and pulled out the banker's box marked Adam. She hadn't opened it in years. It contained all the documents from his death, police reports, insurance records, even newspaper clippings. She spread them out across the living room floor. The report from that night said Adam's car had veered off a bridge during heavy rain. The car was found submerged downstream, badly damaged. His wallet and phone were inside. The driver's side door had been open, suggesting he'd tried to escape. But his body was never recovered. That had been the hardest part, the absence of a body. The authorities searched for weeks. Divers, hélicoptère, Chevrolet Patrol. Nothing. Eventually, they issued a death certificate based on the circumstances. Julia remembered arguing with the insurance company, who at first refused to release funds without a body. But eventually, they relented. She reread the words on the report, presumed drowned. And now, she couldn't help but wonder, had he just walked away? The next day, when Emma got home, she paused at the living room entrance and stared at the scattered papers. "Do you believe me now?" she asked softly. Julia looked up from the floor. Her voice was tired. "I saw someone who looks very much like your dad, but I don't know what that means yet." Emma sat down beside her mother. "It's him. He just has a beard now, and he pretends not to know me." Later that evening, Julia invited Adam's parents, Margaret and Dean Brooks, for dinner. She couldn't bring herself to tell them over the phone. "I need to talk to you both. It's about Emma," she said, which technically wasn't a lie. After Emma went to bed that night, Julia sat at her computer and searched Richard Harrison, Michigan. The search returned too many results. She narrowed it. Richard Harrison, financial advisor, Grand Rapids. And there it was, Harrison Financial Consultants. A small firm, professionally presented. No photo of the owner, just contact details and a logo. Then she saw the phone number. Her hand hovered. What would she say if someone picked up? She dialed. The call went to voicemail. You've reached Harrison Financial Consultants. Please leave a message. The voice on the message, it hit her like a punch. It was deeper, more polished, but the CAD. The inflection. It was him. Julia hung up without leaving a message and then went to social media. She created a fake profile and searched for Richard Harrison, Grand Rapids. Several came up, but most were private. She sent friend requests anyway, feeling both foolish and driven by something she couldn't explain. Sleep was impossible. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thoughts racing. If it was Adam, why? Why disappear? Why fake his death? Why leave them? And then she thought of Sophie, the little girl he'd picked up, Emma's classmate. She looked about the same age as Emma. Had he started a new life while they mourned? The next morning, she called Emma's school and arranged for her daughter to stay in aftercare. She couldn't let her witness anything if she went back to confront this man. Then she called the principal. Angela, quick question. Do we have cameras covering the parking lot and playground? We do, Angela replied. Why? There was an incident during field day. A man on campus who made Emma uncomfortable. I'd like to review the footage. Angela, trusting Julia as a colleague and a district employee, agreed. That afternoon, Julia sat in the school's security office with the IT coordinator. They queued up the video from field day. We're looking around lunchtime, playground area, and parking lot. At first, the image was too wide to catch detail. Emma appeared in her yellow sweater, lunch tray in hand. Julia's breath caught. There, she pointed. Zoom in near the fence. A man stood by the fence, waving to a girl, Sophie. The camera zoomed. The image pixelated, but was clear enough. He bent to speak with the girl. Then he looked up. There, his profile, his posture, even the way he tilted his head. Julia gasped. She saw Emma freeze and drop her tray. The man noticed, his eyes widened. Then he grabbed Sophie's hand and left. Is that who you needed to see? The IT staffer asked. Julia nodded. Yes, thank you. That evening, when Adam's parents arrived, Julia did her best to act normal. Dinner went on like always, with Emma chatting about school. But after sending her upstairs to get ready for bed, Julia took a deep breath. There's something I need to tell you both, she said. And I know how crazy it's going to sound. Margaret's eyes widened. What is it? I think Adam might be alive. They stared at her. Dean's face went stiff. Excuse me. Julia explained everything. Emma's sighting, the drawing, the school footage, the man named Richard Harrison. Margaret's hand went to her mouth. Dean turned pale. You're suggesting our son faked his death? Dean said, his voice hard, that he just left you? Left Emma. I don't know what happened, Julia said, but I know what I saw. And tomorrow, I'm going to confront him. Friday morning arrived with a strange stillness. Julia barely slept, her nerves humming with what was about to happen. She called out of work again. 2 personal days in a row, something she hadn't done since Adam's funeral. But this was no ordinary week. According to Margot, Adam volunteered with the school's reading program every Thursday afternoon. If he followed the same pattern, he might still be on campus early Friday for planning or prep. Julia knew she couldn't delay. She had to see him, speak to him, face whatever truth waited behind those familiar eyes. She dressed carefully, nothing too formal, but composed. A navy dress with sleeves pushed up to her elbows. The same dress she'd worn to her last parent-teacher conference. She told herself it gave her strength, or maybe it simply helped her feel like herself. Parking across the street from the school, she waited. Kids spilled from the building as the last bell rang. Julia watched from behind her sunglasses, heart thudding so hard it hurt. Then, at 3:45, he appeared, the man with sandy hair, dressed in a pale gray sweater and tan slacks, an outfit so reminiscent of Adam that her throat tightened. He walked toward his car. Now or never. Julia opened her door, stepped onto the curb, and crossed the street. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The wind tugged at her hair, but all she could hear was the pounding in her chest. "Adam," she called out. He stopped. His back stiffened. Slowly, he turned. 5 years had aged him. His beard was neatly trimmed now, his frame slightly leaner. A few lines creased his forehead. But those eyes, those same warm, alert, devastating eyes, hadn't changed. "I think you have the wrong person," he said calmly. "My name's Richard." Julia walked closer. "No, your name is Adam Ray Brooks. You're my husband. You're Emma's father." His jaw tightened, but his expression remained unreadable. "I'm sorry, but I—" "Don't lie," she cut in. "Not again. I know it's you. Emma knows it's you. You even looked right at her when she saw you. She recognized the scar above your brow." He faltered. For a second, his eyes darted to the playground behind her, checking if anyone was listening. Then back to Julia. "Please," he said, voice low. "We can't do this here. Not in front of the kids." "Then when?" she demanded. "Another 5 years?" He sighed. "Rockwell Park. Tonight, 8 p.m. Come alone." And with that, he got in his car and pulled away. Julia stood motionless on the curb, staring at the empty space where his car had been. Her head was spinning, but one thing was clear. This wasn't her imagination. It was real. That evening, she arranged for Emma to sleep over at her friend Chloe's house. Lisa, Chloe's mom, raised an eyebrow when Julia dropped her off. "Everything okay?" Julia nodded tightly. "Just some personal things I need to handle." Then she drove to Rockwell Park. She arrived 20 minutes early, her stomach in knots. The sky was streaked with the soft pinks of sunset, and ducks floated lazily on the pond. This park held too many memories. They'd taken long walks here after Emma was born. It was even where Adam had proposed. Now she sat on a bench, waiting for a man who had once been her whole world, and might still be. At exactly 8 p.m., he appeared, walking down the trail like a man heading into battle. He sat beside her, leaving a careful space between them. "You haven't changed," he said quietly. "You look exactly the same." "Don't," she snapped. "Don't act like this is some kind of reunion." He nodded. "You're right. I'm sorry. Are you Adam?" she asked. She needed to hear it from him. He hesitated, then looked at her and said, "Yes. My name is Adam." She exhaled sharply. There it was. Confirmation. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you do this to us?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I was in trouble, Julia. The kind of trouble I couldn't drag you and Emma into. What kind of trouble justifies faking your own death? The kind that might have sent me to prison." He looked down at the grass. "I made bad decisions. Financial ones. I got involved with clients who wanted creative accounting. It started small, but it escalated. Offshore accounts. Hiding money. Shady stuff. I was laundering money, basically." Julia was stunned. She'd always known Adam was careful, conservative with money, risk-averse. Or so she'd thought. "I didn't want you or Emma dragged through it," he continued. "If I was arrested, our accounts would be frozen. Everything gone. And Emma, she would have had to grow up with a felon father. So instead, she grew up without one at all." Julia said bitterly. "We grieved you. Buried an empty casket. I held our daughter at your funeral. You let us believe you were dead. I thought I was protecting you. By starting a new family?" He looked away. "I met Cynthia a year after I left. She was a single mom. Sophie was 3. Cynthia got sick. I promised to take care of her daughter." Julia's voice dropped. "So you raise another child while leaving your own to cry at your grave?" He pulled a worn photo from his wallet. "Emma at age 3. I carried this every day." Julia stared at the photo, rage boiling in her chest. "That's what you think counts? A photo?" They sat in silence for a long moment. "Why did you come back to Cleveland?" she finally asked. "Sophie's grandmother lives here. When Cynthia passed, her mom wanted to be closer to Sophie. I didn't plan to end up at Emma's school. I swear." Julia looked away. "So what now? What's your plan?" Adam swallowed hard. "I don't know. I only know I want to fix it." "You can't," she said. "You can't fix this. But you can start by telling Emma the truth. You owe her that." He nodded slowly. "Okay, but want to do it right. With you there. With help, if needed." Julia's tone softened just slightly. Saturday, 10 a.m. At my house. I'll be there. She stood, heart thudding. One more thing. If you run again, if you disappear, I swear to you, I'll bring the law down on you. You'll answer for everything. Adam nodded, the weight of his guilt etched in his face. I won't run, he said. Not this time. Saturday arrived, cloaked in soft rain, tapping gently against the windows as if the sky itself was bracing for what was to come. Julia paced her living room, every so often glancing at the clock and then at the front door. She hadn't told Emma what was going to happen, only that someone important was coming over. Her daughter had sensed something. She always did. Julia had consulted with a child psychologist earlier that week, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Leah Winters. Leah arrived first, exactly on time, carrying a slim briefcase and an expression of calm empathy. They sat briefly in the kitchen, reviewing the strategy they'd agreed on. We're not giving Emma more than she's ready to handle, Leah said. Simple truths, spoken with love, are best. She may ask difficult questions. That's okay. Don't over-explain, just be honest. Let her set the pace. Julia nodded, barely hearing. Her mind was spinning too fast to absorb anything fully. At 9:59, Adam's car pulled into the driveway. He was dressed simply, blue button-down shirt, clean his beard slightly trimmed. He looked like the man in their old photos. But to Julia, he also looked like a stranger playing dress-up in the costume of her past. He knocked once, then opened the door slowly, cautiously, as if afraid to step into the life he'd abandoned. Emma was outside playing with the neighbor's dog through the backyard fence. Julia went out to bring her in. "Sweetheart," she called, "someone very special is here." Emma jogged up the steps, face flushed from a cold. As she entered the living room, she froze. Her eyes locked onto Adam, confusion immediately spreading across her face. "Sophie's dad," she said, looking between him and her mother. "Why is he here?" Adam knelt down to her level, leaving a respectful gap between them. "Emma," he began, his voice unsteady, "I'm not just Sophie's dad. I'm her dad, too." Her brows furrowed. She looked at Julia, as if for confirmation. "But my dad died," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I was little." Julia walked over, kneeling beside her. "That's what we thought, baby. It's what I thought, too. But it turns out your dad didn't die. He's been living somewhere else, with a different name." Emma turned slowly back to Adam, eyes wide with disbelief. "You're really my dad?" Adam nodded, eyes shining with tears. "Yes, Em, it's me." She took a tiny step forward, examining his face like she was trying to find the truth in his features. "You have the scar," she whispered, pointing to his eyebrow. "Just like in the picture on my nightstand." "Yes," he said quietly. "That's me." Emma's lip trembled. "Why did you go away? Didn't you love us anymore?" The question shattered the room's silence. Adam inhaled sharply, struggling to keep his composure. "Emma, I did love you. I still do. I made a terrible mistake, something I thought would protect you and your mom. But it was the wrong choice. I got scared, and instead of facing it, I ran away. I hurt both of you, and I'm so sorry." Emma stared at him, like when I broke Mom's favorite vase and said the cat did it. Adam let out a soft, painful laugh. "Yeah, a bit like that. But this was much, much worse. I didn't just lie. I left. And I know that hurt you. I can never undo that." For a moment, no one moved. Then Emma turned to Julia. "Are you mad at him?" Julia paused. She had promised herself she'd be honest. "Yes, sweetie. I'm angry. Your dad hurt us a lot. But I'm also glad you get to talk to him now, if that's something you want." Emma nodded slowly, thinking deeply like only a child could. Then, without warning, she took a step forward and threw her arms around Adam's neck. "I knew it was you," she whispered into his shoulder. Adam's arms came up, trembling, and held her gently, carefully, as if she might vanish again. Julia turned her face away, swallowing back emotion. Dr. Winters watched quietly, giving a small nod of encouragement. The hardest part was over, but what followed wouldn't be simple. Emma pulled back slightly and looked up at Adam. "Is Sophie my sister?" He blinked, surprised by the question. Yes, he said gently. She's your half-sister. You have different moms, but I'm her dad too. Does she know about me? Not yet, but I plan to tell her. Careful like we told you. Emma's brows furrowed. That must be confusing for her. It might be, Adam admitted, but I'll make sure she understands. After a long pause, Emma asked, Are you going to live with us now? Adam shook his head. No, sweetheart. I live with Sophie and her grandma, but I'd like to spend time with you, if that's okay with you and your mom. Emma seemed to consider this seriously, weighing her answer. Then she nodded. Okay. Dr. Winters rose quietly. I'll give you 3 some time. Julia, would you walk me out? Outside? Julia exhaled deeply, the chill air clearing some of the fog in her head. She's handling it better than I expected, Julia said. She's still processing, Dr. Winters replied. It will take time, but yes, she's strong, and she loves you both very much. After the psychologist left, Julia returned to the living room. Adam was showing Emma a trick with her Rubik's Cube. Emma watched with fascination, giggling when he pretended to mess it up. The simplicity of the moment hit Julia like a punch. This ordinary, small thing was what they'd lost for 5 years. 5 birthdays, 5 Christmases, first days of school, skin knees and dance recitals, and Sunday pancakes. When Emma left to feed her fish upstairs, Adam turned to Julia. She's amazing. She is. I can't believe how much she's grown. You don't get to say that, Julia said, voice quiet but firm. You weren't here. He nodded slowly. You're right. She crossed her arms. You have 1 week, Adam. 1 week to figure out how you'll explain this to your parents. How you'll explain it to Sophie. And 1 week to decide whether you're going to finally face what you've done or keep hiding. I'll come up with a plan, he said. You have my word. Julia gave a small, sharp nod. Good. Because if you disappear again, I won't be chasing shadows this time. I'll make sure you answer for everything. He looked down, ashamed. I understand. Julia walked him to the door. As he stepped out into the rain, she paused. She hugged you, she said. I know, Adam whispered. It's a start, but it's not forgiveness. I don't expect it, he replied. I only hope one day I might earn it. He walked to his car without looking back. Julia watched him drive away, heart aching with all the things she couldn't say. The week that followed was unlike any Julia had experienced before. It felt like straddling 2 realities, one where her husband had died 5 years ago, and another where he was suddenly part of her daughter's life again. Each morning, she prepared Emma's lunch, drove her to school, smiled through staff meetings, and carried on with the routines she'd built in Adam's absence. But under the surface, her thoughts were never still. Emma didn't bring up her dad much during the week, but Julia knew she was thinking about it. There were moments like when Emma paused a beat too long before answering a question, or when she stared at her old family photos a little longer than usual, that spoke volumes. Julia chose not to push. She wanted her daughter to feel safe, to come to her on her own terms. On Wednesday evening, Julia sat alone in the living room with a legal pad in her lap. She'd been trying to list out everything that still needed to happen, everything Adam had to account for. The list was longer than she expected. His parents, Sophie, legal consequences, school administration notifications, therapist follow-ups. Each item was another thread in a tangled knot of betrayal, grief, and sudden reappearance. Late that night, a message pinged on her phone. It was Adam. I've been thinking nonstop. Can we meet again tomorrow night? Same place. I have a plan. Julia stared at the screen for a long moment before replying with a single word. Yes. The next evening, she arrived at Rockwell Park just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Adam was already seated at the same bench by the duck pond, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His posture was tense, but his expression was steady. In his hands, he held a folded piece of paper. Thanks for coming, he said as she sat beside him. You said you had a plan, Julia replied, cutting straight to it. I've thought about everything. Emma, Sophie, your parents, my parents, the law. I know I can't fix what I've done, but I can start by telling the truth. All of it. She raised an eyebrow, surprised. To who? Just me and Emma? No, everyone. I want to tell Emma's grandparents. I want to tell Sophie. Eventually, even the authorities. If I have to go to prison, I will. Julia stared at him, stunned. She had expected excuses, delays, maybe another plea for secrecy. Not this. I'll tell Emma's therapist first, he continued. We'll prepare together, and then I'll explain everything to Sophie. She deserves to know the truth, too. Julia folded her arms, processing. So you just going to turn yourself in? I've already contacted an attorney, told him the whole story. We're putting together a plan to surrender and take a plea deal. I'm not running anymore. Julia, I'm done living in hiding. His voice trembled on the last sentence, and Julia believed him. This wasn't a performance. This was a man who had finally accepted that there was no hiding from what he'd done. I've arranged funds for Sophie to stay with her grandmother, he added. I made sure she'll be okay if I go away. Julia looked out over the water. And what about Emma? What if she asked why you left and only came back when it was convenient for you? I'll tell her the truth, he said, that I was a coward, that I didn't think I deserved to be in her life until I saw her again and realized how much I'd stolen from both of us. Silence sat heavy between them. You used to call me Liv, she said quietly. Adam gave a sad smile. I haven't said that name out loud in 5 years. It didn't feel like I had the right. Julia's heart pulled in two directions. She didn't want to feel anything for him. Not warmth, not sympathy. But hearing him say her nickname, the name only he ever used, was like stepping into sunlight after years of cold. And us, she asked softly, what are we now? He looked down. That's not up to me. I gave up the right to decide that the day I walked away. If you want a divorce, I'll sign the papers. If you never want to speak to me again after this, I'll respect that too. I haven't been with anyone else, she said, not even sure why she was confessing it. Adam's eyes lifted, meeting hers. Neither have I. Another silence. This one warmer, almost familiar. I'm not saying we have a future, Julia said quickly, standing to leave. But I need time. We both do. This isn't something we can rush. Of course, Adam said. Whatever you need. Just don't shut me out of Emma's life. Julia nodded. We'll tell her grandparents after we talk to Emma again. Sunday. That's our next dinner with them. And if you run, I won't, he said, standing with her. Not again. As she turned to go, he said her name softly. Julia. She looked back. Thank you for not turning me in. Yet, I didn't do it for you, she replied. I did it for Emma. By the time she got home, Emma was already asleep. Julia stood at the edge of her daughter's bed for a long time, watching her breathe. Innocent, brave, unknowingly at the center of a storm that had changed all their lives. Emma stirred and opened her eyes sleepily. Mom, I'm here, baby. Did you talk to Daddy? I did. Is he still staying? Julia smiled faintly. He wants to, if you're okay with that. Emma nodded and turned over, clutching her stuffed animal. Good. Julia kissed her forehead. I love you, Em. I love you too, Mom. Downstairs, Julia sat in the living room, staring at the photograph on the mantel. The old family photo with Adam holding baby Emma, the three of them frozen in time. That image had once represented everything she'd lost. Now, somehow, it felt like a starting point. Sunday arrived faster than Julia expected. She felt every bit of it in her bones, the anxiety, the dread, the anticipation. She had not told Margaret and Dean anything yet. The dinner was set like always, just as it had been every Sunday since Adam's death. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes. Emma had drawn a picture for her grandparents, completely unaware that what lay ahead would shatter their understanding of the last 5 years. When Adam pulled up to the curb in his nondescript sedan, Julia met him outside. He looked pale, his jaw tense, his shoulders hunched like a man bracing for impact. They're inside, Julia said. Emma's helping set the table. I haven't told them anything yet. He nodded slowly. Do they still think I'm dead? They mourned you every week, every holiday, every missed birthday. So yes, they do. He swallowed hard. Let's not drag this out. Inside, Margaret was fussing over the gravy while Dean scrolled through emails on his tablet. Emma ran over to Adam, excitement bubbling in her voice. Daddy, I saved your seat. Dean's head snapped up. What did she just say? Julia stepped forward quickly. Dean, Margaret, please sit down. There's something we need to tell you, and it's going to sound impossible. Margaret turned, wooden spoon still in hand. What's going on? Julia took a breath and gestured toward Adam. He's alive. The silence that followed was crushing. Dean blinked slowly. What? This is Adam, Julia said gently. He didn't die in the accident. He disappeared, and now he's back. Margaret's spoon dropped to the floor with a clang. Her hand flew to her mouth as she staggered back a step. Dean stood up, so quickly his chair screeched across the hardwood. This is sick, he said. Is this some sort of joke? Adam stepped forward. It's me, Dad. Don't call me that, Dean snapped. My son is dead. We buried him. You buried a casket, not a body, Julia said quietly. We never found him, Dean. We assumed because we were told. But he survived. Margaret shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. How could you do this to us? She whispered. We mourned you. We grieved you like you were gone. Adam's voice cracked. I know what I did was unforgivable. I thought I was protecting all of you. I made terrible choices, financial crimes. I thought if I disappeared, you'd all be safer. Dean advanced a step, trembling with rage. Safer? You let your wife bury an empty box. You let your daughter grow up thinking her father was in the ground. Do you know what you've done to this family? Adam stood frozen, absorbing the blow. I never meant to hurt anyone, he said, voice low. I was scared. You were a coward, Dean spat. Julia stepped between them. Stop. This isn't helping. He's not asking for your forgiveness. Not now. But Emma knows, and she's already accepted it. Whether we like it or not, he's here, and we have to figure out what happens next. Margaret sat down slowly, her hands trembling in her lap. I don't know if I can look at you, she said to Adam. I dreamed of this moment so many times, and now that it's real, it feels like a betrayal. Adam künnet besi deher. I missed you every day, Mom. I thought about you and Dad all the time, but I didn't deserve to come back. Not until I had something to offer. I know I failed you. Dean turned to Julia. You knew about this and didn't tell us? I found out less than a week ago, she said, and I didn't believe it at first. I had to see it with my own eyes. Margaret looked at her granddaughter. Emma was drawing quietly at the kitchen table, humming to herself. And Emma? She knows. She's handling it better than all of us, Julia said. Because she's a child. She sees love and she accepts it. We could learn from her. They sat in silence for a long time after that. The food on the stove was forgotten. The air was heavy with confusion, pain, and the echoes of too many lost years. Later that evening, after Adam had left, Margaret called Julia from her upstairs bedroom. I don't know how to process this, she said, voice raw. I still feel like I'm in a dream. I know, Julia replied. Me too. But I saw his face, Julia. That's my son. No matter what he's done, that's him. And I don't think I can pretend he doesn't exist. That's more grace than he expected from either of you. I can't forgive him yet, Margaret whispered. But I can't hate him either. Not fully. Not now that he's here. Julia ended the call, feeling drained. She went to Emma's room to tuck her in. Did Grandma and Grandpa know? Emma asked sleepily. They do now. Were they mad? Julia hesitated. They were shocked and hurt. But I think deep down they're glad. Emma nodded. Good. Daddy's not perfect, but I still love him. Julia kissed her forehead. Me too, she whispered, though she wasn't yet sure whether it was true. The next day, Julia accompanied Adam to his lawyer's office. The mood was somber. They discussed timelines, legal exposure, possible outcomes. Adam insisted on full transparency, including turning himself in before the end of the month. The lawyer, a measured, gray-haired man named Vincent, laid it out clearly. You faked your death. That's not just a felony. It's potentially fraud, obstruction, abandonment. You'll be charged. Best case scenario, you get 18 months in a minimum security facility. Worst case, much more. Adam nodded. Understand. I won't fight it. You have a daughter, Vincent said. Two, actually. Are you prepared for what this means for them? Adam glanced at Julia, then back at the lawyer. I'm not running anymore. I'll take what's coming. Outside the office, Julia turned to him. Once this starts, there's no undoing it. I don't want to undo it, he replied. I want to finally do something right. And for the first time since his reappearance, Julia believed him. The days that followed were a delicate balancing act. between truth and stability, past and present, forgiveness and fallout. Julia coordinated with Dr. Winters to prepare Emma for the next emotional hurdle, meeting Sophie. The girls had seen each other in school, maybe passed each other in the hall, but they had no idea they shared blood. The conversation began the following Saturday morning, seated in the same living room where Emma had first wrapped her arms around the father she thought was gone. Julia sat beside Emma on the couch, Adam across from them, visibly nervous. "Sweetie," Julia began, "there's someone else we want to talk to you about. Someone important." Emma perked up, curious. "Who?" Adam leaned forward, his voice gentle. "You remember Sophie? From school?" Emma nodded. "Yeah, she's in second grade too. She's quiet." "Well," he said carefully, "Sophie is your half-sister." Emma blinked, unsure she heard right. "What?" "You and Sophie have the same dad," Julia explained. "Your dad." Emma looked from one adult to the other. "Does she know?" "Not yet," Adam admitted. "But we want to tell her soon, in a way that won't confuse or scare her." Emma's brows furrowed. "Is she going to be mad?" "She might be surprised," Julia said, "just like you were. But we think she'll understand once we explain everything." Emma nodded slowly. "So we're going to meet?" "Yes," Adam said. "We'll arrange it with Sophie's grandma. Maybe next weekend, if you're ready." "I want to meet her," Emma said softly. "If she's my sister, I want to know her." That night, Julia and Adam met with Janet, Sophie's maternal grandmother. It was a tense and emotional conversation. Janet had raised Sophie since her daughter's passing, and the news that Adam wasn't who he claimed to be left her visibly shaken. "I let you into our lives," she said, voice sharp with betrayal. "Into her life. And you were lying the entire time?" "I never lied to Sophie," Adam said quietly. "I just didn't tell her the full story." "That's a lie by omission," Janet replied coldly. Julia intervened gently. "I know this is a lot, Janet, but we thought it was best to come to you first, before Sophie hears it from someone else. Before the girls start to bond without knowing the truth." Janet sat back, her arms crossed. "And what happens when the press finds out? When someone Googles Adam Brooks and sees his obituary and a new business listing under a different name?" "I'm turning myself in," Adam said. "I'm confessing everything. That includes the fake identity." Janet's eyes widened. "You're going to prison?" "Most likely, yes," he said. "I've made arrangements to ensure Sophie stays with you. I've set aside funds for her. I'm not walking away from her, Janet. Not like I walked away from Emma." Janet was silent for a long time. Then, slowly, she asked, "Does Sophie even know about Emma?" "No," Adam admitted. "But we want to tell her. With care." Janet gave a small sigh. "You better mean that. Because Sophie's already lost one parent. If you do this wrong, she'll lose you too." That week, preparations began for the girls' first meeting as sisters. Dr. Winters suggested a casual, supervised play date at a neutral location, preferably somewhere fun and light. They chose a children's art center that offered weekend workshops. Saturday came, and Julia arrived first with Emma. She wore a pale blue dress and clutched a sketchbook nervously. "Are you scared?" Julia asked as they walked in. Emma shrugged. "A little. What if she doesn't like me?" "She will," Julia said softly. "You're kind, and kind people always find their way to each other." Sophie arrived moments later with Janet. She looked hesitant, hugging a stuffed panda and eyeing the room warily. Adam walked in last. He greeted Sophie with a warm hug, then knelt down. "Sophie," he said gently, "I want you to meet someone very special. This is Emma." Sophie blinked, looking between Emma and Adam. "She looks like me," she whispered. "She does," Adam said. "That's because she's your sister." There was a beat of silence. Then Sophie asked, "Is she from before I was born?" Adam nodded. "Yes. I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry I didn't." Sophie looked at Emma. "Do you like art?" Emma held up her sketchbook. "Yeah, I draw dragons." "Want to see?" Sophie smiled faintly. "I draw cats. We could trade." And just like that, the tension dissolved. Over the next hour, the girls painted beside each other. They shared markers, compared drawings, and even made a joint painting of a flying cat-dragon hybrid. Watching from across the room, Julia and Janet exchange a glance. Not quite trust, but something close to it. "They're off to a good start," Julia said. They are, Janet agreed. And I suppose we should be too for them. The next few weeks passed in a blur of cautious progress. Adam worked closely with his lawyer, completing documentation, gathering letters of character reference, and finalizing his surrender plans. He also scheduled a full disclosure meeting with the district attorney's office, where he explained his disappearance and the reasoning behind it. The prosecutor agreed to a plea bargain. Because Adam was voluntarily surrendering, had no history of violence, and because his deception stemmed from financial, not violent, crimes, he was granted a reduced sentence, 18 months in minimum security custody, with potential early release for good behavior. On the day of his sentencing, Julia drove him to the courthouse. Emma didn't come. She was with Margaret and Dean, who had finally softened enough to allow Adam a brief farewell visit before he left. In the courthouse hallway, Adam turned to Julia. "Thank you for everything. I didn't do this for you," she said, repeating the words she'd told him once before. "I did it for the girls." He smiled faintly. "Still, thank you." Just before he turned to enter the courtroom, he added, "Tell Emma I'll write. Every week." "She'll write back," Julia said. "Every week." She watched him walk through the doors, flanked by officers, and felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. This was closure, but not the end. Not yet. The first letter arrived 5 days after Adam began his sentence. A simple envelope with clean handwriting addressed to Emma Brooks. Julia found it in their mailbox and paused for a long moment before handing it to her daughter. "It's from your dad," she said gently. Emma's eyes lit up. She tore it open on the couch, unfolding the page with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Julia watched from across the room as her daughter's expression softened, her lips moving silently as she read. "He drew a picture of us," Emma said, holding up a page where Adam had sketched a scene of them playing with sidewalk chalk. "He remembers." Julia sat beside her. "Of course he does." From that point on, it became a weekly ritual. Every Sunday, Emma received a letter. Sometimes they were filled with stories from Adam's past, things she'd never known. How he broke his arm in 6th grade, how he met Julia, how he used to build forts out of couch cushions. Other times, he sent puzzles, silly jokes, or sketches of imaginary creatures Emma could color. And Emma wrote back, pages filled with updates about school, drawings of her own, questions she hadn't dared ask face-to-face. Julia made sure each letter was sent on time, slipping them into the mailbox with a quiet hope that these words might rebuild something stable from the pieces of the past. Sophie wrote too, encouraged by her grandmother Janet, though her letters came less frequently at first. Slowly, the bond between the sisters deepened. They started video chatting once a week, reading to each other over FaceTime or showing off their latest Lego builds. By the time Sophie's birthday rolled around in June, Emma had made her a scrapbook filled with sister facts and drawings of the two of them. Janet and Julia grew closer as well, born not out of trust, but out of shared duty. Two women navigating the wreckage left behind by one man's choices. They often met at the park while the girls played, trading updates and advice, learning to find peace in each other's company. "We're a strange little tribe," Janet said one afternoon, sipping her coffee as Emma and Sophie chased bubbles across the lawn. "Yeah," Julia replied, "but it's working for them." Margaret and Dean, once consumed by betrayal, had found their way back to their son in small, halting steps. Margaret visited the prison every other month, bringing books and photographs. Dean, slower to soften, had agreed to one visit, just one, but it ended with a tearful embrace that neither man spoke about afterward. Legally, Julia was still married. Adam had signed the divorce papers without hesitation, but Julia hadn't filed them yet. She kept them in a drawer, unsure whether the delay was for practical reasons or emotional ones. When her therapist asked why she was waiting, she said simply, "Because I don't know who I am without all of this yet." Dating had crossed her mind. A coworker had even asked her out, kindly and without pressure. But Julia wasn't ready. Not yet. Not while she was still sorting out who she had been before Adam left, and who she wanted to become now. The summer passed in a rhythm that finally felt manageable. Emma seemed lighter, still thoughtful, still cautious, but no longer carrying the same quiet grief. She had her dad again in a way that worked for her. Structured, safe, distant enough to be processed, close enough to be real. Julia, too, found herself breathing easier. There were still hard days, still waves of emotion that came unexpectedly at the grocery store, at school events, during conversations with other single moms, but she no longer felt defined by loss. She was something new now, something stronger. One Saturday in late August, a letter arrived from Adam that felt different. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded carefully, with a message addressed not to Emma, but to Julia. Leave. I know you didn't expect this letter, but I needed to say something that's been sitting heavy on my chest. Thank you, not just for Emma's letters, or the visits, or for not slamming the door in my face that day at the school, but for being the kind of person who still puts her child's well-being above her own pain. I see that now. I see what you carried, what I left you to carry, and I'll never stop regretting it. I'm not asking for a second chance. You owe me nothing, but I want you to know I meant every word at that pond. I loved you then. I never stopped, and I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to love you better. If this is the last letter you ever want to receive from me, I'll understand. But if there's even a sliver of space in your heart for friendship or forgiveness or something else, I'll be here. Hoping, waiting, no pressure, just truth. Always, Adam. Julia read the letter twice, then folded it quietly and placed it in the same drawer where the divorce papers sat. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just sat with the words. And then, after a long moment, she pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. Not because she'd made a decision, but because there was more to say. A week later, Emma brought home an assignment from school. Write about someone who had surprised you. Her response was short and simple. My dad surprised me. I thought he was gone forever. But he came back. He made big mistakes, but he said sorry. That's really hard to do. He's trying to be better. That surprises me. And I'm glad. Julia posted the essay on the fridge where it stayed for weeks. As autumn settled in, so did a new sense of peace. Not perfect, not clean, but real. And that was enough. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and let us know your favorite moment in the comments.